Introverts will point to his wanting to get away and pray, and they're called an introvert.
Right.
Extroverts will point to his being in the crowds of people,
preaching to the
being
multitudes.
an extrovert. You know, we each will pridefully look at ourselves and point to Christ as being like us, when really we need to examine him and be like him.
So the whole fatal flaw that we have from beginning, we want God to be in our image rather than us being in his image.
Yeah, it doesn't work too good either.
Welcome to the Developing Great Relationships podcast, where we are having conversations to help you understand God's design for great relationships and how to develop the habits needed to achieve it. Now here is your host, Joshua Verwers.
So in last week's podcast, we were talking about introversion and extroversion. We had a great conversation, but we just started scratching the surface. Welcome back to this Developing Great Relationships podcast. I, Joshua Verwers, and Dr. Mark Majors are back once again to give you a little bit more information about introversion and extroversion, and that starts right now. All right, so we're back again. We're talking about the introversion, extroversion. When we left off in the last episode, I said I wanted to kind of come back to this statement you had made about Jesus when it comes to the introversion, extroversion, and how he's essentially like right down the middle. Mm-hmm. And it almost brings up this thought that we had covered a couple episodes ago about these personality types that we've got, the 16 types, the letters, the E, the I, the S, the N, the T, the J, the P, or I think I missed an F in there. On those, it's kind of this sliding scale. And so what you're saying is like Jesus is balanced, like perfectly balanced between introversion, extroversion?
Yes. Introverts will point to his wanting to get away and pray, and they're called an introvert.
Right.
Extroverts will point to his being in the crowds of people,
preaching to the
being
multitudes.
an extrovert. You know, we each will pridefully look at ourselves and point to Christ as being like us, when really we need to examine him and be like him.
So the whole fatal flaw that we have from beginning, we want God to be in our image rather than us being in his image.
Yeah, it doesn't work too good either. Let's look at the Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
I often ask people in seminars, what was he, introvert or extrovert? And they'll say, oh, he was an extrovert. He did all the talking.
Right.
Well, that's not really true.
Yeah.
You know? We know that he wrote prolifically.
Yeah.
The epistles, Romans, and, you know, everything he wrote. But he's the perfect person to do ministry from prison. And sometimes he was in dungeons.
Yeah.
But sometimes he was, you know, fastened to a Roman soldier and
24 hours a day.
Able to move about on his own, in his own house, rented house, and have people come care for his needs. So it was quiet because a whole bunch of people didn't come in with the Roman soldier there because he was thinking that they're probably trying to free him.
Yeah.
And you get in trouble when people steal your prisoner. And so it was probably quite quiet. He probably had a few people there, is dictating letters, and he wrote so much of the epistles, you know, from that type of environment. And
but what about when he did talk, when he was...
What's fascinating, because Ananias came to him after his conversion on the road.
Yeah.
And he sees Christ. And it says, after the scales fall off his eyes, Ananias lays hands on him, heals him. He's born again. He's filled with the spirit of boldness. So we're talking about spiritual gift here.
Okay.
The Holy Spirit filled him with boldness. And so he went out and started being an orator, talking about Christ.
Okay.
And we find that that's very true. But that was the spiritual gift of the evangelism was given to him, you know, of going and debating and arguing. Well, he had the gift of debating probably prior to that as a Pharisee. Mm-hmm. And so he probably liked to argue and be right. But now he's discussing about Christ. Paul, they called Zeus and not Barnabas, Silas.
Silas, yeah.
Yeah, he called Hermes because he was the chief speaker.
Oh,
Yeah, so
right.
yeah, it wasn't
Okay.
Paul talking, it was Silas.
Okay. So then you're talking about this, and this is really that spirit of boldness. It's one of the gifts. I mean, being a pastor, I know a lot of pastors, and I'm almost surprised at how many pastors I've seen that are introverts because of having to be up and speak on a regular basis. But as you mentioned, gift, is that a similar thing where that pastoral thing to be able to speak is really God's gifting on them? I mean, Ephesians talks about he gave some gifts, some apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastor, and teacher. Would that be a similar thing where that spiritual gift has really come on them to help them do what their natural tendencies couldn't?
Yeah, I've found often introverted pastors who are excellent orators, very social, very interactive, and they're at 3 o'clock on Sunday, they're dead.
Right.
They're out of gas. The Holy Spirit fills them, and they do what they need to do, and then they become depleted.
Yeah.
Spiritual gifts are given to us at the pleasure of God.
Okay.
By
Right.
by the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
imparted by the Holy Spirit. Yes, spiritual gifts, like the gift of prophecy, is under the control of the prophet. So we have some manner of participation into this,
Right.
but we don't sit and stomp our feet at God and say, "Give me this spiritual gift."
Yeah.
Yeah, and He gives.
Yeah, it's as He wills.
He gives them to us as we have need to fulfill His
plan.
desires.
Right.
His
Okay.
plan. So a fascinating thing was the falling out between Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas, son of encouragement,
Right.
very much extroverted, over John Mark.
Yeah.
And we see that Paul kind of repented of his rigidness that was probably fostered as a Pharisee. Because none of us, when we're born again, are completely Christ.
Right.
It is the sanctification process where we get there.
Yeah, it takes time.
Paul actually became more loving, caring, extroverted, tender, sweet, as time went on, and patched up things with John Mark.
Right.
Very powerful, very important.
So if the Apostle Paul is really introverted, and I think you can see that, especially when you think about, we often think Bible, yes, it's written, but because of the way we present the Bible in society today is primarily through the spoken word. We do a lot of the reading of it and the preaching from it. But with him being in that written form, that would make sense. I know there was one passage that I know you had shared with me some time ago. What was it? In 2 Corinthians 10:10, that says, "For they say that his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech of no account."
Yeah.
And it's like we often don't think about that as the Apostle Paul.
Yeah. Powerful when he wrote a letter and he could think and reflect.
Yeah.
But somewhat timid and quiet when he was in their presence.
Right.
Yeah. And if we think of the Apostle Peter.
Okay.
Peter, it says, regarding him on the Mount of Transfiguration, he didn't know what to say, so he said it. Perfectly extroverted.
Right.
It's a quiet moment. I got to say something.
Yeah. There's a gap in the conversation. I must fill it.
And there was a fair amount of tension between Paul and Peter.
Oh, yeah.
They had some conflict. So
Right.
Peter, very gregarious and social, being surrounded by people, interacting with them, loving to talk, even when he hasn't thought it through.
Yeah.
And
Well, and even the extrovert, introvert, we're using these couple examples about the speech and how but that's not the entire picture of introversion, extroversion, because you'll have introverts that will do a lot of talking, but it's more about, I guess we go back to the mental energy, thinking and reflecting. So an introvert won't just say every single fleeting thought that comes to their mind like I would, right?
Right. No, the motto for the extrovert is, I think, therefore I talk.
Yeah.
And the introvert is, I think, maybe I'll talk, maybe I won't, I don't know.
Depends on if it's
Yeah,
needed to be said.
Yeah, yeah. And so they ponder whether or not to talk and when to talk. Big things, a big thing that happens at board meetings with individuals is the introverts are thinking and reflecting about what to say, and the extroverts don't shut up. They keep going, and so an extrovert may say to an introvert, well, you never say anything at these meetings. And the introvert would probably say, that's because you never shut up and give me a chance. And so the rule when I'm training CEOs or people that are running board meetings or leaders, I teach them, set the standard where at some point in the meeting, when you need to hear from everybody, you go around the room pointing to them one at a time.
Oh.
And you have everybody else be quiet and allow them to speak. That way the introvert knows when it's going to come to them, and they will think about and reflect on what they're getting ready to say.
And if they know their audience well enough, don't start with an introvert.
It is best if you give one a chance.
Give them a little bit of time to think about what they want to say.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and it gives them that option to pass. They don't say they really don't have anything.
Right.
And it gives the extrovert an option to pass if they think about it, but then they have time to think.
Yeah. Yeah, because I would sit there and say that there is sometimes that does happen with me even where that's me getting out of the extrovert, trying to introvert a little bit more. My wife is more introverted. She is an introvert, but closer to the extroversion on that scale. But I'll even notice times that in a group of people, she won't talk right away. She's taking stock of the conversation and thinking about it. And then, so I try to follow her as I'm following Christ, so to speak, in that moment. It's like seeing that that's one of my weaknesses. She can do more of that than I can. What would she do in that situation? Yeah. And there are those moments that I'll think, and it's like I could just keep my mouth shut and it wouldn't add to or take away anything.
Yeah. Couples who have been married for quite a while can have great tension along extroversion and introversion. They either resolve it or they just remain sort of in a position of mutually assured destruction. They won't talk about it.
Right.
Because it brings up a fight.
Yeah.
And they don't want to fight. And so after a while, the introvert develops things they go do on their own. The extrovert develops things they go do on their own. But there's no real, harmony and peace in the home in some respect. They coexist peacefully.
Yeah.
But it's a constant bone of contention. And I tell you, the most difficult times is vacation. They have to be together for 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. And frequently, post-Christmas time, people will often be off for a week or so.
Right.
My office will be full of people who've had things blow up during Christmas.
Oh.
That one never wants to do anything. That one never wants to stay home. This one never shuts up. It's always noisy. This one's always complaining, saying there's something wrong with me.
And not being able to recognize the differences, the tension points. And if you don't recognize it, you can't address it properly.
That's right.
Because it's all misplaced at that point.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh man, that's
It's all
good.
very painful.
Yeah.
It's very painful. When it starts and then degrades into what's the matter with you, why do you do that?
Yeah. And I would say the E and the I, the introversion, extroversion, it's probably even more of a pain point because it's how we interact. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and it's so genetic. You can watch it in children 3-4 years old as they play. They may play more quietly, girls with dollies and whatever, but one girl may be out running, just tearing up and just going crazy, and the one running wants the quiet ones to join in, and they don't want to have anything to do with that. They want quiet play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, we're going to take a little detour, because you just mentioned this with kids. As kids, when it comes to a classroom setting, oftentimes we get a lot of the label about, hyperactivity, that they just won't sit still. I was one of those kids that I'm sure, had the diagnosis been there, 30 years ago, I would have been the poster child for Ritalin at times. But as I look back on my personality and I sit there and I recognize a couple of my teachers that got me out of my desk. And they got me up and doing things. I remember one of my first ones, Mr. Derrick. And this was 4th grade, and he took me up onto the roof, part of one of the programs, to learn about meteorology and weather and patterns. And so we're up on the roof of this school, which probably isn't acceptable in this day and age, but studying acid rain and things like that. But just getting to be able to do and to interact rather than sitting behind it. Is there that element of that where we've, even with our kids and our children, we've tried to fit them into one certain box?
Yeah. There's a lot of problems with that, and we haven't even gotten into parents and children and the problems that exist with them. But in the school setting, I'm twice as old as you are, and there were no labels as a child. The teachers knew that some of the kids were active, antsy, they had to get out. Sitting in the classroom quietly is introverted behavior. It's not extroverted behavior. And there were not a lot of multimedia things to keep us attentive and going. And I remember distinctly my 5th grade teacher using me as a bellwether when it was time to have recess. Which we'd have 3 times a day at least.
Yeah.
And so we would have recess, and I'm hypothesizing, but I'm thinking she probably thought, well, better let Mark out.
Right.
Boy
needs to, saying exert some energy, but it was probably more about gaining mental energy.
I would go out the door and run, just take off, because I needed that kind of expression.
Yeah.
It wasn't ADD, it was just, I was depleted and getting irritated and wasn't able to concentrate.
Right.
So the half-hour recess was wonderful. Yes, the introverted kids would quietly do things. I remember introverted boys playing marbles, quiet, cerebral, The rest of us were playing softball.
Yeah.
Yelling, hollering, throwing the ball. Quiet girls were talking and stuff and doing hair things, and it's just the way it is. After recess, I could focus. I could pay attention. And I believe she was a pretty smart teacher. My 5th grade teacher, she would structure the difficult classes after recess.
Oh, there you go. When your mental energy is up.
Yeah. Now at home, it's great problems. You could have 2 introverted parents with an extroverted child, and they're saying to the doctor, what's the matter with them? Doesn't stop.
Right.
They're comparing the child with themselves.
With themselves. Yeah.
And they're thinking there's something wrong. Well, there's nothing wrong.
Right.
The child's doing what comes naturally. Extroverted parents with an introverted child. Well, you have a shy one. You have a quiet one.
Right.
Yeah, it's not shy and quiet. Thinking. It's a great art to think.
Right.
Keeps you out of all kinds of trouble.
Trying to figure out why are mom and dad so crazy.
Yeah. Well, the child begins to think, what's the matter with me?
Oh, yeah.
Rejection, guilt, pain, lifelong struggles, hurt. Yeah. Very painful.
Yeah.
As adults, we manage rejection poorly, all of us. But children can't handle it.
Yeah, they're not even close to being equipped.
Yeah, well, the power that parents have to speak identity into the life of the child is a gift from God. They're supposed to speak the truth of Jesus Christ, the love and acceptance.
Yeah.
Instead, when they say, "What's the matter with you? Can't you hold still? What's the matter with you? Why don't you talk?
I'm
What's
broke.
the matter?" The words, "What's the matter with you?" And the child just thinks, "Well, what's wrong with me?
Right.
I'm flawed. I'm no good."
And
That's
it's that rejection that we have. That rejection that, I mean, all of us, we can trace that back to the garden.
Yep.
That is just so terrifying and debilitating for us.
Well, and it's what we're talking about with all E and I issues.
Yeah.
That I reject you because you are not me.
Right.
And, you know, the failure to love the child as they are and just openly, unconditionally love creates tremendous amount of problems in the world.
Yeah. And this goes in, I mean, so deep, and it touches on a point that you've hit over and over again in our conversations about we need to take up our cross daily. We need to accept one another. We need to receive one another. And really, we need to be serving one another. And it's not just in the marriage relationships. It's also, yeah, with children. It's in the workplace. It's all of this. There's a lot that we can really get in on here. Are you cool if we pick this up in the next episode and we talk about the parent-child relationship a little bit more, and maybe even jump in on workplace stuff?
You know, workplace stuff, school stuff, even further, very important things. Yeah, we can go into that.
All right, let's do that. We'll pick this up in the next episode then. All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I hope you enjoyed looking at personality types and how that can really affect us in all of our relationships. If you did enjoy this episode, I would just encourage that you could share this with your friends, with your family, by using the social media links below. And until next time, we will just see you on the episode so we can all develop great relationships.